In a rain-soaked observation blind in the Thuringian forest, a Soviet intelligence officer listens to a sound that does not belong. It is October of 1982, and the Cold War is a contest of steel and numbers, a game of brutal arithmetic he has spent his life mastering. But the drone in the sky, a river of heavy transport aircraft, is bringing something new, something that cannot be counted in the usual way. Men without their machines, a quiet anomaly that is about to shatter his entire understanding of modern warfare. October 1982. A biting autumn wind moves through the Thuringian forest like a slow, cold animal, carrying the smell of coal smoke and wet pine from the villages below. Major Dmitry Vulov, an officer of the GRU, Soviet military intelligence, hugs the collar of his greatcoat closer and lets the thick wool take the first bite of the damp. He has been here for 3 days, nested in the guts of an observation blind whose wood has long ago gone gray and soft in the German rain. The field glasses at his cheek are warm from his own breath. His hands are numb where they grip the heavy lenses. He has spent a lifetime learning to read the world in small, significant things. The precise tilt of a supply truck on a muddy road, the disciplined cadence of a convoy, the faint, coded hum of a radio transmission. And for 3 days, the world has been telling him a story that his training, his doctrine, and his entire worldview refuse to accept. At dawn, as the sky thins to a flat, steel white, the sound arrives. It is not the sharp crack of gunfire, not the screaming pitch of a fighter jet tearing through the sound barrier. It is a low, continuous industrial drone that threads its way through the trees and sets his teeth on edge. It is a sound that does not belong to a battlefield, but to a factory, an assembly line transposed into the sky. It is the bewildering, unending pulse of heavy transport aircraft. They come as a river, massive C-5 Galaxies and C-141 Starlifters, as heavy as moving mountains, trailing long white contrails like the tails of comets in the upper atmosphere. He watches them descend in a steady, orderly procession toward Rhine-Main Air Base and other NATO airfields. They land, disgorge their cargo, and then return to the sky, an ordered, almost mechanical carapace crossing the Atlantic. Vulov watches them land the way a man watches a heart rate on a monitor, looking for a pattern, a meaning. Each arrival reads the same through his powerful field glasses. The rear ramp lowers, the cargo door lifts, and then men spill out. But it is the nature of these men that is the first part of the mystery. The soldiers are not ragged from a long flight. They look fit, rested, and quiet, their uniforms impossibly uncreased, their faces emptied of the usual boredom and fatigue of long-distance transit. They move to waiting buses in neat, orderly groups and are whisked away along the Autobahn, small, efficient packets of manpower escorted by German military police. He watches them closely. They carry small rucksacks, sidearms, and most strangely of all, clipboards. There are no heavy weapons, there are no streams of tanks or armored personnel carriers rolling out of the bellies of the giant planes. Where are their tanks? He has asked the question 3 times in his many encrypted transmissions to his GRU desk in Moscow. Each time, the answer has been a variation of the same bureaucratic shrug. "Check your coordinates, Major," came the cold, impatient voice of a colonel from the analysis section. "You are likely seeing repetition. The C-5s are probably circling. This is a demonstrative exercise, a show of force for the cameras." The reply is laced with the old, familiar lesson that has guided Vulov's entire career, the central axiom of Soviet military thought. Do not be swayed by American spectacle. Count the steel, count the guns. An army, they believed, was measured in iron and mass, not in empty gestures and troop movements. The patter of rain on the roof of his blind thickens into a gray curtain that morning, obscuring his view. From his perch, he watches a convoy of the same buses peel off the Autobahn and disappear between the ancient hedgerows, winding their way into a valley of gentle slopes and old stone houses. This is the Palatinate, a region famous for its wine and castles, not a place that could sustain the thunderbolt of modern war. Vulov allows himself to relax just for a moment. The Soviet plan for a European conflict is simple, brutal, and linear. Build a sea of steel, a massive numerical advantage in tanks and artillery, and roll it out by rail and road, swamping the West with sheer numbers. The Americans, with their long supply lines across the Atlantic, are a distant worry. Their industrial weight, they believe, could be matched and overwhelmed in the first crucial weeks of a war by the endless, grinding wagon trains of the East. The buses disappear from view, and the mystery, for a moment, seems to have resolved itself into a simple troop rotation. The doubt remains, but the evidence for a true threat is still missing. Then the warehouse doors open. Vulov's attention snaps back to a complex he had noted on his maps, but largely dismissed. They were a series of long, low, windowless concrete buildings, faceless complexes that could have been storing anything from commercial goods to agricultural equipment. He had assumed they were part of the local German economy. Now, with a sound like a dozen slow waves breaking on a distant shore, massive steel doors the size of buildings begin to creak and roll upward. Vulov had noticed these warehouses before, but he had never suspected they held skeletons. At first, through the rain and the mist, he sees just a single muzzle, the pale, dark circle of a gun barrel emerging from the cavernous darkness within. Then a silhouette begins to resolve itself, and the darkness gives way to the blunt, relentless, and utterly unmistakable geometry of an M1 Abrams main battle tank. Then another, and another. A forest of cannons and turrets begins to emerge, their hatches open, thick cables still hanging from their sides like the entrails of some great sleeping beast that is just now being awakened. Across the valley, another slab of concrete sheds its skin. A second warehouse exhales a line of M2 Bradley fighting vehicles and the long, powerful barrels of self-propelled artillery pieces. Engines cough to life, not with the deep, guttural roar of Soviet diesels, but with a strange, high-pitched whine. The sound of couplers and track pins rattles across the valley. And then the men from the buses, begin to flow through the massive doors and into the vehicles. They move not with the hesitation of strangers, but with a practiced, economical choreography of people who have worked together for years, of crews being reunited with their own machines. Vulov's breath catches in his throat. His hands, numb just moments before, are now slick with sweat as he lifts the handset of his radio. He speaks with a voice that sounds thin and foreign to him, the words tumbling out in a rush of dawning horror. Comrade Colonel, repeat. Tanks in warehouses. I say again, tanks in warehouses. Active. They are starting the engines. For a long, agonizing second, the microphone in his hand is a dead thing. The only sound is the hiss of static. Then the crackled voice of the colonel from Moscow returns, the same man who had built his 20-year career on the unshakable certainties of Soviet doctrine. Major Vulov, the voice says, laced with a dangerous mixture of confusion and irritation, repeat your transmission. This is nonsense. Vulov repeats it, his own voice now sharp, precise, devoid of emotion. He is no longer an analyst offering a theory. He is a witness reporting a fact that is currently rolling out of a concrete building and forming into an armored column in a German valley. There is a long silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Vulov can almost picture the scene in Moscow. The ancient sand table maps of the general staff, the neat rows of red pins representing their own divisions, the confident lines of doctrine that have been recited like psalms since the end of the Great Patriotic War. All of it is now being rendered obsolete by what he is seeing through his binoculars. The colonel's voice, when it returns, is flattened, stripped of its earlier arrogance, replaced by an older, colder tone. We will verify. Continue observation. The line goes dead. Vulov knows that he has just thrown a grenade into the heart of the Soviet military establishment. He had not expected the chain of command to collapse instantly. Men in uniform are made of habit and doctrine. To tell such a man that his foundational habit is wrong is to ask him to cut off a limb. But denial, he senses, is only the first of many stages. The reports begin to pour in from other observation posts along the front, small at first, then a flood of corroborating evidence that cannot be ignored. Other stations are reporting clusters of buses arriving at innocuous-looking compounds. GRU agents on the ground confirm the existence of double-checked shipping manifests. A maintenance log lifted by an asset from a depot near Kaiserslautern provides the first damning piece of physical proof. The mystery of the men without tanks is solved. They didn't need to bring their tanks with them. Their tanks were already here, waiting for them, hidden in plain sight. The first deep cracks are beginning to appear in the monolithic facade of Soviet military doctrine. The comfortable, predictable arithmetic of a war in Europe has just been shattered. While a quiet crisis builds in Moscow, in Bonn, a similar scene of dawning horror unfolds. Colonel Klaus Richter of the Stasi's Foreign Intelligence Service, a man whose professional life has been dedicated to charting the precise strength and location of NATO forces, stares at a wall map that had always been a source of comfort. The neat rows of red pins representing Warsaw Pact divisions had always dwarfed the scattered blue pins of the West. It was an iron fiction of numerical superiority that had guaranteed a kind of stability. But now, new blue pins are blooming in places where none had been before, their number suggesting that entire American armored divisions have materialized out of thin air. There is an odd, sour taste in his mouth that morning, the taste of coffee burned with the nervousness of men forced to confront new permutations of old fears. He does not like the new map. It looks dangerously balanced. Across the valley from Vulov's hidden perch, the source of this new balance is being enacted with a quiet, almost mundane efficiency. The site, known to the Americans by a clinical, bureaucratic acronym, POMCUS, for prepositioned overseas material configured to unit sets, has its own unique language. It is a language of paperwork, of clipboards, of maintenance schedules, and of 1,000 small, precise rituals that keep heavy, complex things alive in a state of suspended animation. Private First Class Michael Ames from Dayton, Ohio, is one of the thousands of soldiers who has just been bussed out from Rhine-Main Air Base as part of the annual REFORGER exercise. He is tired from the long flight, disoriented by the strange, damp smell of the German countryside. He feels as if he has just walked into a factory that was paused mid-shift. Inside the cavernous warehouse, men in clean, olive-drab coveralls greet his unit not as warriors but as neighbors greeting someone at a factory gate. "You're early," a master sergeant says, a wry smile on his face that speaks of a clean, sure confidence. "Don't worry, they keep everything ready for us." He hands Ames a clipboard. "You'll find your assigned vehicle, fit your personal gear to it, sign the property card, check the battery connections, oil the track pins, then start her up." Ames, a young man who had been taught to imagine a war as a series of pitched, heroic, and chaotic moments, of headlights cutting through mud, of shouting and confusion, had not been taught the religion of forms. But there is something deeply calming in the simple, methodical list, a process that slows fear and replaces it with purpose. The M1 Abrams tank that will later be mythologized in pamphlets and debriefings sits before him, cold and silent like a domestic animal. Its hatches are open, and a civilian maintenance contractor is wiping the dust from a periscope with a soft, old rag. Ames runs his fingers across the stenciled numbers on the turret and feels the faint, residual warmth of the metal. The checklist in his hand is a small, personal incantation against the chaos of the world. A visual inspection of the tracks, a check of the radio connections, a verification of the engine fluid levels, a confirmation of the fuel load. He checks each box with the focused deliberation of a man opening a present, a gift of immense power that has been waiting patiently just for him. Outside, the warehouse doors continue to roll up in precise, timed intervals, each steel slab a rhythmic pulse in a larger continental clock. As crews complete their checks, engines begin to kickstart across the valley. The sound is not the massed, guttural roar of Soviet diesels. It is a higher-pitched, almost musical turbine song, the sound of the AGT-1500 gas turbine engines spinning the Abrams tanks to life. Like jets that have been converted to crawl, the valley fills with a sound for which the Soviet observers have no word. It is not the sound of menace, not the sound of victory, but simply the clean, powerful music of things that have been impeccably prepared. The skeleton has found its flesh, and it is beginning to move. Back in Moscow, the initial panic in the GRU headquarters begins to acquire a decorous, almost academic edge. Intelligence rarely arrives as a single, neat story. For weeks, the analysts work in shifts, assembling a mosaic of disparate information. Vulov's increasingly detailed cables, signals intelligence tapes, and the latest high-resolution satellite passes over West Germany. They try to find the seams in the American strategy, to find a flaw. The ingrained Soviet habit is to map everything into the matrix of what it already expects, a contest of mass versus mass. The problem here is that the Americans seem to have discovered a third dimension, a way to assemble that mass on demand as if from thin air. Most of the senior leadership remains trapped in denial, but Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov, chief of the General Staff, is one of the few in the Ministry of Defense who reads the new maps with a cold, unblinking eye. Ogarkov is a hard man, a brilliant and often abrasive strategic theorist with a mouth like a hammer, and a face that looks like it has been carved by a Siberian frost. He is a military intellectual, feared for his brutal honesty and his contempt for the comfortable dogmas of the old guard. He walks into a windowless planning room, clears a massive table, and lays out a single, clean white sheet of paper. He begins to place blue and red markers on it, not representing units, but concepts. "They do not plan to match us tank for tank in a field," he says, his voice a low rumble that cuts through the murmuring in the room. "They plan to avoid the field altogether." "How?" someone asks, the question a mix of confusion and defiance. "By being elsewhere," Ogarkov answers, placing a blue marker representing a POMCUS site deep behind the front lines. He then places a red marker representing a Soviet armor division on the border. "And then by being here," he says, moving a second blue marker from an imaginary airbase in the United States and placing it directly on top of the first. "They are keeping their equipment where it is needed and moving their men to it faster than we can move our tanks from their barracks to the front." The word faster hangs in the air like a verdict. For 40 years, Soviet strategic calculations had begun with a simple, powerful ratio. In the first crucial days of a European war, the Warsaw Pact would enjoy a 2-to-1, and in some sectors, a 3-to-1 advantage in tanks and artillery. It was a rule that beat like a drum in every staff meeting, in every war game, in every political threat issued to the West. This numerical superiority was the foundation of their entire military and political posture. It was the iron fist that guaranteed them a seat at the world's table. What the new data from Vulov's observations does is erode the very skin of that drum. It makes the sacred ratio meaningless. The Americans are not playing the same game of arithmetic. The Soviet plan relies on a 72-hour window, the time it would take for the first significant American reinforcements to begin arriving by sea. In those 3 days, the Red Army's Sea of Steel is supposed to have already captured its key objectives, presenting NATO with a catastrophic new reality on the ground. But the POMCUS sites and the massive airlift capability of the C-5 Galaxy have turned that 72-hour window into a historical fiction. The Americans are no longer reinforcing across the ocean. They are activating forces that are already in theater. The new arithmetic is terrifying. Instead of waiting weeks for heavy divisions to arrive, the Americans can now fly in an entire armored brigade's worth of personnel in a matter of hours, marry them to their prepositioned tanks and fighting vehicles, and have them rolling towards the front in less than a day. The Soviet numerical advantage, the cornerstone of their 4-decade-long strategy, has been effectively nullified, not by a new weapon, but by a filing cabinet and an airplane. The drumbeat of their doctrine has fallen silent, replaced by the high-pitched, unfamiliar whine of a turbine engine in a quiet German valley. In the Palatinate, the American armor, now fully crewed and operational, forms into neat, disciplined columns. With a quiet efficiency that borders on the uncanny, they roll toward roads that have been rehearsed a dozen times on maps in distant classrooms and in the crude digital simulators of the era. The drivers swing their 60-ton machines into place, their eyes scanning the instrument panels with a practiced familiarity. Platoon sergeants, standing exposed in their open hatches, bark out orders that have been refined and standardized in dusty trailers at Fort Hood, Texas, and in the cold, damp mess halls of Grafenwohr, Germany. This entire rearmament process is so smooth, so devoid of theatricality or wasted motion, that it removes any sense of a performance. What might have looked like a parade or a political demonstration to an outsider is revealed to be a simple, mechanical reality, an assembly line in reverse. The men who climb into these vehicles are not raw recruits fumbling in the dark. They are a mix of active duty soldiers stationed in Germany and, more critically, well-trained reservists flown in from the United States. Yet they move with a shared, practiced familiarity that erases the distinction between them. They are craftsmen returning to a machine that is theirs by habit, if not by immediate possession. The clipboards and the reams of paperwork, which had seemed so strange and bureaucratic to Major Vulov, are now revealed to be the true secret weapons of this new kind of warfare. The soldiers checked the serial numbers stenciled on the turrets of their tanks and the hulls of their Bradley fighting vehicles, matching them to the numbers on their assignment sheets, with the focused precision of stagehands checking their props before a major performance. This is not a battle to be won by heroic impromptu charges. It is a battle being won in this very moment by the quiet, meticulous, and overwhelming power of bureaucracy. Major Vulov watches it all unfold with the kind of profound disbelief that keeps the body perfectly still and makes the heart beat with a strange, alien rhythm. His encrypted reports to Moscow become more frequent, their tone shifting from confused observation to a stark, trembling clarity that borders on alarm. It is not a show. He sends in one particularly blunt dispatch, the words hammered out on his encryption machine. It is a system. They have entire divisions' worth of combat-ready equipment in these storage sites. The soldiers took possession of their vehicles as if they were picking up a rental car from a depot. They are fueled, armed, and moving to their assembly areas. Estimated time from arrival at warehouse to full combat readiness, under 12 hours. At GRU headquarters in Moscow, the reaction to this cascade of information runs the gamut from personal insult to a deep existential panic. The old men, the marshals, and generals who had cut their teeth on the brutal physical realities of the Great Patriotic War mutter about industrial trickery and capitalist deception. They are men who understand war as a contest of production, of steel forged in the roaring furnaces of the Urals and shipped to the front on thousands of groaning, overloaded rail cars. This American method, this quiet, almost magical activation of dormant power, feels like a violation of the natural order of things. It is a trick, a gimmick, not a true measure of military strength. But the young analysts, the new generation of officers who are, by practice and temperament, less invested in the old certainties, push back with the undeniable data pouring in from Vulov and other sources. The sacred convention that had structured every Soviet war plan and every 5-year production cycle, the assumption that the opening 72 hours of a conflict would buy them the crucial time needed to build an insurmountable advantage in men and materiel, is crumbling under this new and terrifying arithmetic. The Americans are not just closing the transatlantic reinforcement gap, they have effectively erased it. The opening moments of a war in Europe will no longer be a Soviet blitzkrieg against a thin, sacrificial NATO screen. They will be a head-on meeting engagement between two fully mobilized heavy armored forces. And in that scenario, the Warsaw Pact's vaunted numerical advantage, the central pillar of their entire military philosophy, is gone. This realization is more than a tactical problem. It is a crisis of identity. For 40 years, the Soviet Union had defined itself and projected its power through its massive, tangible military might. Its strength was visible in the endless columns of tanks rumbling through Red Square on May Day, in the sheer, intimidating numbers of its divisions arrayed against the West. Now they are confronted with an enemy whose power is, in large part, invisible, held in reserve not in bustling barracks, but in quiet, anonymous warehouses, ready to be activated by a telex from the Pentagon and a fleet of C-5 transport planes. It is a system that is both everywhere and nowhere at once. It is a ghost army, a skeleton force that can be given flesh and sinew in a matter of hours. The Soviets have been preparing their entire existence to fight a body, a physical entity they could count and measure. They have just discovered they are fighting a spirit. The humiliation for the Soviet system is not simply operational, it is epistemological. It is a fundamental shock to their way of knowing, a realization that not only can their rival match them in strength, but that this rival can think and organize on a different, more abstract scale. In the face of this new reality, the GRU and the KGB do what they have always done when faced with an unsettling strategic development. They resort to active measures. Small reconnaissance patrols, composed of their best Spetsnaz operators, are tasked with probing the perimeters of the POMCUS sites, attempting to plant sensors or gather close-in intelligence. It is a good plan on paper, a textbook example of the kind of covert action at which they excel. In the theater of reality, it is an expensive and embarrassing error. They discover that the anonymous-looking warehouses are not the soft targets they appear to be. The sites are protected by multiple layers of security, sophisticated ground surveillance radars and thermal imaging arrays, technology the Soviets are only just beginning to field themselves, pick up the heat signatures of the infiltrating teams from miles away. The perimeter fences are not simple chain link, they are integrated with seismic and infrared sensors. The response is not a chaotic alarm, but the quiet, professional dispatch of American military police and German security forces who move with the efficiency of men who have drilled for this exact contingency 100 times. The Spetsnaz teams are intercepted with almost casual ease. The few who manage to slip away and return to their handlers bring back nothing but the taste of dust, a few blurry, useless photographs, and the distinct memory of feeling very small in a place that has been engineered not only to be strong, but to be perpetually, invisibly vigilant. This failure reinforces the dawning, terrifying conclusion in Moscow. The American system is not just about pre-positioning tanks, it is about creating an integrated, multi-layered defensive network. The United States has not merely fielded a better army, it has designed a different kind of system, one that blurs the lines between procurement, maintenance, pre-positioning, and airlift, turning the entirety of war into a problem of logistics writ fast. The POMCUS sites are as much a triumph of bureaucratic choreography as they are of steel. They are the physical manifestation of a system that can leverage contracts with civilian shipping companies, that can seamlessly integrate reserve forces into its order of battle, and that can build an assembly line of men and machines that spans an ocean. It is, in the end, a victory of civil and administrative systems over a singularly military imagination. The Soviet model, with its rigid separation between the civilian economy and the secretive military-industrial complex, cannot replicate this. Their system is designed to produce tanks, not to create the flexible public-private partnerships needed to maintain and deploy them with such speed and efficiency. They are watching a rival conduct war with the tools of a modern corporation, and they have no answer. As Major Vulov's reports continue to multiply, a kind of quiet, philosophical silence settles over him. He has the distinct and unnerving sensation of being a man who has looked into a mirror and found it reflecting back a foreign face. His radio, once a source of clear, hierarchical commands, has become a small crucible of confused and contradictory sounds. The anxious voices of his superiors in Moscow demanding answers he cannot give. The clipped professional radio chatter of the American units he is monitoring in the valley below. The quiet hum of a system that is working exactly as it was designed to. At night, he lies awake in his damp observation post and listens not to the wind in the pines, but to the faint, lingering echo of the turbine engines he had heard that day. They have a music that will not leave him, the sound of an idea he is only just beginning to understand. The POMCUS sites were not a secret weapon. They were the visible tip of an invisible iceberg, a system of thought that had rendered his own doctrine obsolete. The humiliation for the Soviet system is not simply operational, it is epistemological. It is a fundamental shock to their way of knowing, a realization that not only can their rival match them in strength, but that this rival can think and organize on a different, more abstract scale. In the face of this new reality, the GRU and the KGB do what they have always done. When faced with an unsettling strategic development, they resort to active measures. Small reconnaissance patrols, composed of their best Spetsnaz operators, are tasked with probing the perimeters of the POMCUS sites, attempting to plant sensors or gather close-in intelligence. It is a good plan on paper, a textbook example of the kind of covert action at which they excel. In the theater of reality, it is an expensive and embarrassing error. They discover that the anonymous-looking warehouses are not the soft targets they appear to be. The sites are protected by multiple layers of security, sophisticated ground surveillance radars and thermal imaging arrays, technology the Soviets are only just beginning to field themselves, pick up the heat signatures of the infiltrating teams from miles away. The perimeter fences are not simple chain link, they are integrated with seismic and infrared sensors. The response is not a chaotic alarm, but the quiet, professional dispatch of American military police and German security forces who move with the efficiency of men who have drilled for this exact contingency 100 times. The Spetsnaz teams are intercepted with almost casual ease. The few who manage to slip away and return to their handlers bring back nothing but the taste of dust, a few blurry, useless photographs, and the distinct memory of feeling very small in a place that has been engineered not only to be strong, but to be perpetually invisibly vigilant. This failure reinforces the dawning, terrifying conclusion in Moscow. The American system is not just about prepositioning tanks, it is about creating an integrated, multi-layered defensive network. The United States has not merely fielded a better army, it has designed a different kind of system, one that blurs the lines between procurement, maintenance, prepositioning, and airlift, turning the entirety of war into a problem of logistics, writ fast. The POMCUS sites are as much a triumph of bureaucratic choreography as they are of steel. They are the physical manifestation of a system that can leverage contracts with civilian shipping companies, that can seamlessly integrate reserve forces into its order of battle, and that can build an assembly line of men and machines that spans an ocean. It is, in the end, a victory of civil and administrative systems over a singularly military imagination. The Soviet model, with its rigid separation between the civilian economy and the secretive military-industrial complex, cannot replicate this. Their system is designed to produce tanks, not to create the flexible public-private partnerships needed to maintain and deploy them with such speed and efficiency. They are watching a rival conduct war with the tools of a modern corporation, and they have no answer. As Major Vulov's reports continue to multiply, a kind of quiet, philosophical silence settles over him. He has the distinct and unnerving sensation of being a man who has looked into a mirror and found it reflecting back a foreign face. His radio, once a source of clear, hierarchical commands, has become a small crucible of confused and contradictory sounds. The anxious voices of his superiors in Moscow demanding answers he cannot give, the clipped professional radio chatter of the American units he is monitoring in the valley below, the quiet hum of a system that is working exactly as it was designed to. At night, he lies awake in his damp observation post and listens not to the wind in the pines, but to the faint, lingering echo of the turbine engines he had heard that day. They have a music that will not leave him, the sound of an idea he is only just beginning to understand. The POMCUS sites were not a secret weapon. They were the visible tip of an invisible iceberg, a system of thought that had rendered his own doctrine obsolete.